Okay, so today we're looking at something that's a real head scratcher.
Yeah.
You sent over this whole stack of articles about Tulsi Gabbard and
Okay.
her confirmation hearing for Director of National Intelligence,
Right.
which is basically the person who oversees all the U.S. intelligence agencies.
Hmm.
And wow, is she ever a controversial pick
Definitely.
by President Trump?
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, to say the least, her background has definitely raised some eyebrows.
Yeah.
Especially, I think, when you look at her past comments on Russia, Syria,
Right.
even Edward Snowden.
Exactly. Like,
Yeah.
so many things going on here. So what we're going to try to do is dive into her own words from this hearing
Okay.
and see if we can figure out, like, is she a shrewd political operator?
Right.
Is she a true believer in her own evolving ideology, or is she something else entirely?
Yeah.
Like, what's going on here?
I think it's a fascinating puzzle.
Yeah.
And I think her stance on Russia and Ukraine is perhaps the most perplexing piece of it all.
Right. Because before the hearing even started, she tweeted that the war and suffering in Ukraine could have easily been avoided if the U.S. had just acknowledged Russia's so-called legitimate security concerns
Right.
regarding Ukraine,
Right.
which almost sounds like she's blaming the U.S. for the invasion.
It definitely raised a lot of questions
Yeah.
about where her sympathies lie.
Yeah.
And, I think Russia's main concern at the time was NATO expansion.
Okay.
They saw Ukraine potentially joining NATO
Yeah.
as a direct threat right on their doorstep.
Yeah.
But, the international community largely saw this invasion as a clear violation of Ukraine's sovereignty,
Right.
not some defensive act.
So was she just buying into Russian propaganda?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
then she went on to talk about
Yeah.
those U.S.-funded biolabs in Ukraine,
Oh.
even suggesting they could release deadly pathogens.
Right, like that whole conspiracy theory that Russia was pushing.
Uh-huh.
But didn't international experts debunk that? Yeah.
Yeah, these labs were doing very normal public health research,
Yeah.
often in collaboration with the U.S.,
Yeah.
focused on things like disease surveillance,
Right.
important stuff,
Yeah.
especially with pandemic preparedness and all that.
Right.
But Russia twisted it,
Yeah. Yeah.
into this bioweapon scare tactic,
Right.
which is wild because during the hearing, when she was confronted about her seemingly pro-Russia stance,
Right.
she flat out said,
Yeah.
"I don't pay attention to Russian propaganda."
Yeah, she said that.
And that quote really jumped out at me.
Yeah, me too.
It makes you wonder if she truly believes
Yeah.
things she's saying,
Right.
or if it's a calculated strategy
Yeah.
to align herself with Trump's worldview.
Right.
Remember, Russian state media has actually praised Gabbard in the past,
Oh, wow.
even calling her superwoman in an article.
Wow. So maybe she's trying to play both sides.
Yeah.
Like, appearing tough on Russia in the hearing, but then also still echoing some of their talking points.
It's possible.
It's such a risky game, especially for someone who's trying to lead U.S. intelligence.
Absolutely. And speaking of risky, let's not forget her past support for Edward Snowden,
Oh, yeah.
the former NSA contractor who leaked all that classified info about government surveillance programs.
Right. So for those who need a refresher, Snowden basically revealed that the U.S. government was collecting huge amounts of data
Uh-huh.
on its own citizens,
Right.
phone records,
Yep.
internet activity.
Yeah, the works.
Yeah, the works.
It sparked a huge debate about privacy versus national security.
Right.
Yeah.
And Gabbard was firmly on the side of privacy.
Right.
She was arguing that Snowden exposed government overreach.
Yeah.
But in this hearing, she seemed to backpedal a bit.
Interesting.
Yeah, she wouldn't call Snowden a traitor,
Okay.
which is interesting,
Yeah.
but did admit that he broke the law.
Right.
It's like she's trying to acknowledge his revelations, but also say, okay, but he crossed a line.
Yeah. It's a tough line to walk.
It is.
On the one hand, whistleblowers are incredibly important for holding powerful institutions accountable.
Right.
On the other hand, there are reasons why some information needs to remain classified.
Yeah.
Snowden's leaks definitely fell into a gray area.
Yeah.
And, I think her evolving stance on this might give us a glimpse into how she views the balance
Right.
between security and liberty.
Right. And how those views might have shifted now that she's potentially stepping into a role where she would be responsible for protecting national security.
Exactly.
It's definitely something to keep in mind.
Yeah, it certainly is. And speaking of digging deeper, Her 2017 trip to Syria to meet with President Bashar al-Assad
Oh, yeah.
is another piece of the puzzle that we need to examine.
That was a controversial one.
Yeah.
To give some context, the Syrian civil war, which started back in 2011, was incredibly complex and brutal.
Right.
Assad's regime,
Yeah.
rebel groups, foreign powers, everyone was fighting for control. And Assad himself was condemned for using chemical weapons on his own people.
Right.
A true humanitarian catastrophe.
Yeah, the U.S. and many other countries considered him a war criminal.
Yeah.
So Gabbard meeting with him was seen by many as
Yeah.
legitimizing his regime.
Yeah, and yet she defended her actions, saying that it's crucial to meet with anyone
Yeah.
if there's a chance for peace.
Yeah.
So is there any merit to that argument?
Well, on one hand, direct dialogue can sometimes lead to breakthroughs.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be possible otherwise.
Right.
It can build trust understanding,
Right.
even if it's with someone considered a bad actor.
But on the other hand, meeting with a dictator like Assad
Right.
can give him a veneer of respectability
Exactly.
on the world stage,
Yeah,
making it harder to hold him accountable for his crimes.
exactly. And it can be a powerful propaganda tool
Right.
for regimes like Assad's,
Yeah.
allowing them to whitewash their image.
Which makes her skepticism
Yeah.
about Assad using chemical weapons
Right.
even more troubling.
Yeah.
Directly contradicting U.S. intelligence.
Yeah.
There's overwhelming evidence
Yeah.
from multiple independent investigations,
Right.
including by the UN,
Mm-hmm.
that confirms his use of these horrific weapons.
So her skepticism seems to be based on something other than the facts.
Right.
Which again raises concerns about her judgment and whether she's willing to accept the conclusions of the intelligence community.
Right.
The very community she's supposed to be leading.
Right. And then there's the whole aligning herself with Trump angle.
Right.
She actually echoed his view that Assad's fall was due to Russia pulling back support because of the Ukraine war, and even said she stands in full support of Trump's statements on this.
Yeah, which is a pretty strong statement.
Yeah.
Considering the widespread condemnation of Assad's regime.
It is.
It makes you wonder, is she genuinely sympathetic
Right.
to these authoritarian leaders, or is it purely a political strategy to solidify her position within Trump's circle?
It's tough to say,
Ah.
but it's a pattern we're seeing emerge here.
Yeah.
Remember, she tried to repeal Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act as a congresswoman.
Oh, yeah, Section 702.
That's the one that allows surveillance of non-Americans overseas.
Think of it like a giant digital net that can scoop up
Okay.
vast amounts of online communication.
Okay.
So if you're emailing someone in another country
Yeah.
and one of you isn't a U.S. citizen,
Right.
the NSA could potentially intercept those emails.
So even though it targets foreigners, it still raises privacy concerns because those communications could involve Americans.
Exactly. And there have been cases where the NSA has used it to collect data on U.S. citizens without a warrant.
Right.
It's a powerful tool for tracking terrorists and foreign spies,
Right.
but it can be abused,
Right.
which is why Gabbard initially tried to repeal it.
Right. And she even said that protection of our civil liberties is essential.
Yeah.
But now she's flipped. She's calling Section 702 crucial and vital for national security.
Interesting.
What do you make of this 180?
It could be a genuine change of heart.
Okay.
Maybe she's seeing classified information that's changed her perspective. Or maybe,
Yeah.
This is where it gets interesting.
Yeah.
She's aligning herself with Trump,
Yeah.
who's a staunch defender of this program.
Right. Her explanation during the hearing was that her past actions were meant to draw attention to the egregious civil liberties violations happening at the time.
Yeah.
Right?
It's a clever justification,
It is.
implying that reforms have addressed those concerns.
Right.
But many civil liberties groups still argue
Yeah.
that the program is ripe for abuse.
Right.
So if she's confirmed,
Yeah.
it'll be a tightrope walk to balance those concerns with the demands of national security.
A tightrope walk that she's attempting while simultaneously embracing the man she once called unfit to serve.
Right.
And a violator of public trust.
It's a truly remarkable turn of events. I mean,
Yeah.
she ran for president as a Democrat in 2020,
Yeah.
even endorsed Biden,
Right.
and now she's been nominated by Trump,
Yeah.
even praising his re-election as a clear mandate to overhaul the intelligence community.
Which is a pretty loaded statement.
Yeah.
Essentially claiming that the intelligence community was deliberately politicized to undermine Trump
Right.
and needs a major shakeup.
And that echoes a common talking point among Trump and his supporters,
Right.
that there's a deep state working against him.
Right. Is there any evidence to support that?
Well, there were definitely intense partisan battles over the intelligence community's findings related to Russia's interference in the 2016 election.
No way.
Trump constantly accused them of being biased against him,
Okay.
but there's no proof that they fabricated or distorted information
Oh.
to undermine him.
So it seems like she's basing her claims more on Trump's rhetoric than on any factual basis.
Which, again, raises questions about her judgment and objectivity, especially when it comes to Trump.
Yeah.
And it makes her potential leadership of the intelligence community that much more intriguing, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. I mean, we're talking about someone who's been praised by Russian media, met with a dictator the U.S. opposes,
Right.
and seems to have flipped positions on some pretty major issues.
Yeah.
Like, is this just pragmatism?
Right.
Or is there something more at play here?
Let's see if we can unravel that, shall we?
Let's.
It's fascinating because it isn't just about her aligning herself with Trump's policies.
Right.
It's about adopting his whole narrative
Yeah.
of a deep state working against him.
You're right. And that's a
Yeah,
pretty dangerous path to go down.
it is.
It undermines the credibility of the whole intelligence community,
Exactly.
which is supposed to be nonpartisan
Right.
and focused on providing objective assessments.
Exactly. And remember, in her opening statement,
Yeah.
Gabbard stressed that the intelligence community should be relentlessly focused on providing objective, unbiased assessments
Right.
to policymakers.
She said all the right things,
He did.
but then went on to argue that it needs a major overhaul to prevent it from being used as a political weapon.
Right.
Specifically claiming that it was weaponized against Trump.
Right, which raises the question,
Yeah.
if she truly believes that,
Yeah.
how can she effectively lead an organization
Right.
she fundamentally distrusts?
It's a great point.
Yeah.
It's like being put in charge of a ship, but believing half the crew is planning a mutiny.
Right, exactly.
It creates a real crisis of confidence,
Yeah.
not only within the intelligence community,
Right.
but also among the policymakers who rely on their assessments.
Absolutely. And it begs the question, what does reform actually look like to her?
Yeah.
I mean, based on her statements.
Yeah.
It sounds like she wants to purge anyone she deems disloyal to Trump,
Right.
which would be a terrifyingly slippery slope.
Talk about a chilling effect.
Yeah.
Imagine being an intelligence analyst, knowing your job security hinges on whether your assessments align with the president's political agenda.
It would completely erode the foundation of objective analysis. People be too afraid to speak truth to power,
Right.
leading to self-censorship
Yeah.
and potentially disastrous consequences
Yeah.
for national security.
Right. We need the intelligence community to give us the unvarnished truth,
We do.
even if it's unpleasant.
Exactly.
It's like that old saying, you can't make good decisions based on bad information.
Right.
And if the intelligence community becomes a mouthpiece for the president, well, we all lose.
It's crucial to remember that the intelligence community's role is to provide policymakers with the information they need to make the best possible decisions
Right.
for the country,
Right.
not to validate their pre-existing beliefs.
And that brings us to another fascinating aspect of this whole situation.
Yeah.
Gabbard's own political evolution.
Right.
I mean, this is someone who went from being a progressive Democrat to, well, let's just say a figure embraced by conservatives.
It's a truly remarkable transformation.
It is.
From endorsing Bernie Sanders
Right.
to praising Donald Trump, she's certainly charted an unusual course.
So how do we make sense of this?
Right.
Is this a calculated political strategy, or has she genuinely undergone a radical ideological shift?
There are a few possibilities.
Okay.
Some argue she's always been a conservative at heart,
Okay.
and her earlier progressive stances were just a way to get elected in a liberal district,
Okay.
like a chameleon adapting to its environment.
Right.
Others believe she's genuinely evolved,
Okay.
that her experiences, relationships, and the shifting political landscape have reshaped her views.
Right.
Maybe she became disillusioned with the Democratic Party and found a new home on the other side of the aisle.
Okay. Or maybe she's just a fiercely independent thinker who defies easy categorization.
Yeah.
Someone who's willing to challenge the status quo and forge her own path, regardless of party lines.
It's hard to say definitively what's
Yeah.
driving this transformation,
It is.
but it makes you realize that people are complex
Yeah.
and their motivations aren't always transparent.
You're right. And even if we disagree with her, it's important to try to understand her perspective.
To see the world through her eyes,
Yeah.
even if just for a moment.
Even if just for a moment.
It's how we break out of echo chambers
Yeah.
and avoid demonizing those we disagree with.
You hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
It's crucial to actively seek out information that challenges our assumptions.
Right.
to engage with people who
Yeah.
have different perspectives,
Yeah.
even if it makes us uncomfortable.
It can be tough. I know it's much easier to stay in our comfort zones, to dismiss those who disagree with us as ignorant or malicious.
Right.
But that's a recipe for polarization and division, and frankly, we've had enough of that.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
We need to have the courage to listen,
Yeah.
to genuinely try to understand where others are coming from,
Mhm.
even if we ultimately disagree.
And who knows, maybe in the process we'll learn something new,
Right.
discover a perspective we hadn't considered before,
Exactly.
or even change our own minds.
Yeah.
Isn't that the whole point of engaging in thoughtful dialogue? It is, and it's the best way to ensure we're making informed decisions, both as individuals and as a society.
Okay, so we've talked about Gabbard's views on Russia, Snowden, Syria, government surveillance, her relationship with Trump, and her own political evolution.
Right.
But there's one last piece of this puzzle I think we need to examine. It's what it means, to put someone like Gabbard with her history of shifting allegiances
Yeah.
and controversial stances in charge of,
Right.
the organization that's responsible for providing objective intelligence assessments
Exactly.
to the president and policymakers.
You're absolutely right. It raises a whole host of questions about the potential politicization of intelligence
Right.
and what that means, for the future of U.S. national security and foreign policy.
For example, her views on Russia are particularly concerning. She's repeatedly echoed Kremlin talking points,
Yeah.
even suggesting that the U.S. is to blame for the war in Ukraine.
Right.
And her meeting with Assad, a dictator who is accused of using chemical weapons on his own people. Right.
Raises serious questions about her judgment and her willingness to even engage with authoritarian regimes.
Yeah, and let's not forget her apparent about-face on government surveillance.
Right.
I mean, she went from advocating for the repeal of Section 702,
Right.
a controversial program that allows for surveillance of non-U.S. citizens overseas,
Right.
to calling it crucial and vital for national security.
It makes you wonder if she's truly committed to protecting civil liberties, or if her stance on these issues is more about aligning herself with Trump's worldview,
Yeah.
even if it means undermining democratic norms and institutions.
And that's the crux of the matter, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is she a pragmatist willing to work with anyone to achieve her goals?
Right.
Or is she driven by a more ideological agenda that aligns with Trump's vision for America's role in the world?
Yeah, it's a question that only time will answer, but I think her confirmation hearing certainly gave us a lot to think about.
It did.
And I think this deep dive has helped us unpack some of the key issues and potential implications of her nomination. I agree. I think we've explored her stances on a range of really critical issues.
Yeah.
Russia, Snowden, Syria, government surveillance,
Right.
her relationship with Trump. We've also touched on her political evolution
Right.
and the importance of critical thinking
Yeah.
in a world that's just awash in information and misinformation.
And I think the biggest takeaway here is that we need to be vigilant.
We do.
We can't afford to be complacent,
No.
especially when it comes to protecting our democracy and the institutions that safeguard our freedoms.
Exactly. Gabbard's nomination is a stark reminder that we need to be informed, engaged, and active citizens.
Right.
We need to hold our leaders accountable
Yes.
and make our voices heard.
And that starts with understanding the complexities of the issues at hand, which is what we've tried to do today. We've provided you with the context, the analysis, and hopefully the tools to think critically about this nomination
Right.
and its potential consequences.
It's up to each of us to decide what we believe and how we want to engage with the political process. Right. But one thing's for sure, this is a story that's far from over.
It is.
And its outcome will have a profound impact on the future of U.S. intelligence and America's place in the world.
So as always, we encourage you to continue exploring, questioning, and engaging with the issues that matter most to you.
Absolutely.
Because that's what makes for a vibrant and healthy democracy.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive.
I agree. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and we hope you'll tune in next time for another deep dive into the topics that shape our world.
Until then, stay curious,